Welcome back to Morning Joe. Now to the latest numbers from the southern border. As of Sunday, there are nearly 5,800 unaccompanied children in custody with Customs and Border Protection. Nearly 12,000 unaccompanied children in custody under the Department of Health and Human Resources. That's up from last Sunday when there were nearly 4,900 children in Border Patrol custody and just over 3,300 children in custody for more than 72 hours. According to two sources to NBC, the Biden administration will hold a bipartisan briefing tomorrow to update House lawmakers about the crisis at the southern border. Joining us now from the White House, Special Assistant to the President and Coordinator of the Southwest Border, Ambassador Roberta Jacobson. She visited Mexico last week as part of the Biden administration's attempt at diplomacy to quell this unfolding crisis. Ambassador Jacobson, thank you for being with us this morning. Bring us up to speed about what's happening at the border and what the administration is doing to ease this overcrowding at these facilities.
Well, good morning, Willie. Thanks for having me. I think that we're doing everything we can. This is an all-hands-on-deck challenge. As you can see from the numbers of children, unaccompanied children who are in HHS custody, we are moving smartly to expand the amount of space that we have, which is appropriate for children, and moving children out of Border Patrol stations and CBP facilities as quickly as we can. But this is really a challenge that confronts us in the United States, it confronts Mexico, and obviously it confronts the countries from which these migrants come because of the economic situation there and the threat of violence.
Ambassador, it's not just Republican critics who are saying this wave of migrants to the border is because of a new administration. It's many of the migrants themselves who our reporters are talking to down there who are saying, we thought under Donald Trump it was going to be hard to get in here, and even if we got in, then we might get deported. But we believe that Joe Biden talking about a more humane policy at the border makes it easier for us to get here and easier to stay once we're in. Is that not true? What do you say to those migrants?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we say. First of all, we don't apologize for the fact that this is a president who has a more humane policy. The president said it himself the other day during his press conference. He's not going to apologize for taking care of children who come unaccompanied across the border. But I do think we have to make sure people understand that the border is not open, that the majority of people, especially single adults, will be expelled or deported. And that people need to understand that this is not the way to come to the United States, that we are working on legal pathways, on options that they can have to stay in their home countries. We are surging humanitarian assistance after 2 hurricanes last November. So the message to migrants is that, in fact, do not come this way. It is dangerous. It's dangerous because of violence and criminal organizations. It's also dangerous because of COVID. The more people move in groups and end up together in facilities, the more dangerous it is for them, whether that's along the route in groups or in Mexico or once they come in.
Do not come, the message from the Biden administration right now. But there are many, as we just laid out, children who are already there in those facilities, Ambassador. What happens to those kids? How do you reunite them with families? How do you find them somebody in the United States? Because by the day, those facilities are getting more crowded, as you know.
Well, the first thing you do is you accelerate the processing of matching those children to their families. The vast majority of unaccompanied children who come are older children between 15 and 17. They know family members in the United States. Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's grandparents. And we have re-engineered our system to ensure that that matching, that connection to their family takes place much more rapidly, and that they can then move on from HHS facilities to family members. If they don't have family members in the U.S., they are matched with sponsors, foster families, or other environments that are appropriate for children equally rapidly. So that is what we're doing right now, is making sure that we get these children into a home setting as quickly as possible.
Ambassador Caddy Kay with the BBC has a question for you, Caddy.
Ambassador, can you imagine any scenario under which the Biden administration decides that it has to reverse the reversal of the policy and send back unaccompanied children? Because however much the president says don't come at the moment, however much you say the door is not open, the journey is dangerous, the message that these kids are getting in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala is there is a window now to come. So I don't see how you get out of these large numbers of children arriving if they are on the understanding that if they can cross the border, they will be able to stay in the United States, either in facilities or better for them with family members or foster families.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we do in response. The first is to make sure that we have as robust messaging as the smugglers do. And let's be honest, people who are encouraging unaccompanied children or migration through irregular means are mostly the smugglers, who are agile and who are very loud. So we make sure our messaging is loud that it is not the case, that the border is not open. The second thing we do, though, is we have to understand that these trends are also seasonal. They occur at the beginning of the spring every year. Yes, it is a larger group than usual, but that they will also diminish at a certain point. And the thing that we have to do most quickly is get humanitarian assistance, job training, education, feeding assistance, because there's food insecurity throughout these countries. We need to provide options. That's why we restarted the Central American Minors Program. That's why we are expanding it. That's why we are creating new legal pathways so that this number of children and others, families and individuals, will go down because people will have other options, options to stay home and options to come here legally.
Gene Robinson has a question for you, Ambassador.
Ambassador, you recently spoke with Mexican officials. What is it that the administration would like Mexico to do that it's not doing now?
Well, I think the conversations with the Mexicans were the conversations among partners, between partners who are working cooperatively to stem a flow of irregular migration that affects both countries, and that is a tragedy that we both want to work together to overcome. One of the first things we talked about was we had a meeting with their development officials who work, as our USAID does, on root causes in Central America. And we talked about how we can partner to do more and to do more quickly. But the second thing we talked about is how we can ensure that we are taking appropriate care of migrants, but also making sure that they understand that they should not come in this manner. Mexico's own laws have changed recently, and it's one of the reasons why they can no longer accept as many migrant unaccompanied children or families, because they have to be put in their shelter system, which is not as large. So this is not a question of will. They are cooperating fully with us. This is a question of how do we work together using all the tools at our disposal to make sure people who are fleeing persecution are protected, but that people who are coming in irregular fashion do not continue to take this trip.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.